Congratulations. You should have picked up as you came in a prayer list of things to pray for. If you haven't, they're out there on the table. And then we're going through the book of Jude this summer, 16 different messages, several others helping team teach this thing. We had Philip Mackey last week. I'll teach this week, but we'll go over this in just a moment. And don't let that intimidate you. It's just some initial work into the passage we'll look at. Okay, so what we've been doing is just covering any prayer requests to start with and any praises, and then we'll go into our message, then we'll get into prayer. Okay, let's dive into Jude now, verses 12 and 13 tonight. So I like to just briefly walking you through the process that I use in studying, especially the New Testament epistles. So you've got this piece of paper here that you got a copy of, hopefully. So you don't have to handwrite the Greek text out as I have. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. I've done this for nearly 40 years. I think I've translated every verse in the New Testament, or almost all of them. So I have sheets like this, probably too many piles of them. But anyway, what I like to do, I like to write it out. I get familiar with the words that are being selected by the Spirit of God. And then I try to do my own translation, and I'll compare that translation to others who are much more gifted than I am in that area, but to work through it. I will parse the words, so I understand the parts of speech, and if they're feminine, neuter, masculine, plural, singular, whatever. I will work through the usages of whatever infinitives and participles and genitives and on and on and on. So I'm trying to understand the words that God has chosen, and then how they relate to one another, the syntax. So let's walk through the two verses. I'm going to read them to us, and then I'm just going to pick out words, and then I'm going to share how they relate to each other. So verses 12 and 13. So obviously these is reaching back into the previous verse and verses. These are spots in your love feasts, while they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves. They're clouds without water, carried about by the winds, late autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. So the first thing I do is I pick out words that are a little more unique. The words I'm more familiar with, I'm not going to do word studies on, especially if I've done those before or have a pretty good grasp of the word. But in this case, there's a lot of words that you don't read in other books in the Bible. In fact, you have in this just two verses, 3 words that are only used once in the whole New Testament. So that's very unusual. And those words, there's a fancy word defining them. It's called a hapax legomenon, words that appear once or occur once. And so those are going to jump out for our interest. But I'm going to look at the word spots. In verse 12, these are spots. I remember my son, Ben, had the chicken pox, and he had spots all over him. And he was wimping out on a climb up Table Rock in South Carolina. And my brother Bruce was climbing with us. And he looked at Ben and said, "Come on, Spot." And Ben just had a meltdown with it being called Spot. So these are spots. So what's the word spot? So the word spot has a variety of meanings to it. And I'm gonna pick one out that I think is contextually the most accurate word choice. So spots, the meaning I'm gonna land on is that it's referring to a rocky hazard hidden by waves, literally a rock washed by the sea, possibly a reef. So the word spots here, the Greek word, can be describing a rock or reef that cannot be seen, just under the water, okay? The challenge is that the same word spot can have another meaning, which is to soil or to discolor or to spot or to stain. It was used in police reports, used to describe bruises on the body after a man beat his wife. We don't commend the practice, but bruises, spots. Figuratively, it can mean people who have serious faults. We would say character flaws, character flaws. So the word here has a variety of potential meanings. And so I'm going to work through, there's 5 colorful words that are going to be used in these 2 verses. And so I'm going to look at all 5 of them. And that's going to kind of flavor my choice to describe this Greek word and to define it as a rock or reef that cannot be seen just under the water. Okay. So I'm doing a little work on the word spots. Feasts of charity. Feasts of charity. You're going to see in the Greek text here, agapes, in the first line, the last word, agape. You're familiar with that. It's love, agape. And here it's in the plural, feminine plural. So what we have is charities, and the context is really pointing to feasts of charity or feasts of charities, describing a common meal eaten by early Christians in connection with their worship, at least originally, for the purpose of fostering and expressing mutual affection and concern. A fellowship meal, a love feast. So I want to study that. That's an interesting study, feasts of charity. Feeding, I find that an interesting word choice. So in the 3rd sentence, you have a word there I've got circled. It's a participle. Poimenantes, poima, poimen. Poimen is the word, I'm a poimen. That's a shepherd. And the verb form is to shepherd or to feed, to nurture, to care. So it's a neat word. Here it's used in a very self-centered way, but usually a shepherd, you would think of someone serving someone else, serving God, serving others. So it's interesting to see that word choice there, the shepherd. Without fear, you're going to see words with a little letter A, that little fish, that the first word in yellow, you have a little A in front, that alpha. That is how you negate something. You put that in front of a word, it means no or without. So the word is phobos. Phobos, what word do you think of when you hear the word phobos? This guy's got a real what kind of phobia. So let's just survey for a moment. What are your phobias? What phobia do you have? How many have a phobia of fear of heights? Okay. How about my fear is what's in a room really tight? What's that called? Claustrophobia. Okay. Do you have another phobia? Okay, so phobia. Here you have the little letter A in front of it. No phobia, no fear, without fear. Okay, so I'm just looking for words like that a little bit there. This word, late autumn trees in the New King James, in the King James, trees whose fruit withereth. Neat word. It means of late autumn, late autumn trees. Late autumn trees. We'll need to talk about that. What's a late autumn tree? And so I'm working through those type of words. In the next verse, raging. Man, I like that word, raging. It means wild. Usually describing wild plants or wild animals. And sometimes it's used to describe people who are scary, wild in appearance, untamed, uncontrolled. Foaming out. Man, that's a colorful word. Have you ever seen anyone foam at the mouth? These are waves that are foaming, leaving their garbage on the beach, their trash. The word stars and reserve. So I'm just walking through all of these different words. And then I'm going to just see how they relate to each other. So I put the words in, I highlighted certain Greek words in yellow because you know the word in English. We already said phobos, phobia, fear. So look at the next one, line 5. It's dendra. We were just in South Carolina. Pastor Bulkley was making fun of my driving coming down from North Carolina. I was too busy looking at the rhododendron. Rhododendron. Okay, it's a plant. It means tree. Dendron, tree. You have in the verse 13, the second line, asterisk. It comes from the noun astron. Astron. What do you think that might be? Astronomy. Astron, study of the stars. Astronomy. The next word is planeti. Planets. Okay, our English word. And so on. So we're looking at the words. Now, let's walk through the relationship of the words, and then we'll start to dig into the exposition of the passage. But so I'm going to start off, and you have the word these, referring to these apostates that were just described. These are wolves in sheep's clothing. These are nasty people. These are daring rebels. We saw that earlier. And it says, these are, present tense, continually, are I'm just literally walking down the line. Again, the Greek can do word orders different than English, but these are in the love feasts, your spots, or your rocks, or your reef just under the water. And then you have a word that is circled. It's a verb, it's a participial form here, and it's present. So these are people who are in your love feasts, but they're just under the surface. And if you don't know who they are and you don't understand what they're going to teach, you'll be shipwrecked by these people, is the idea. Okay. And they're there and they feast together. So I'm looking at the participle, and there's different usages for the participles in this language and other languages. And this is what my judgment is, it's an attendant circumstance. So my usage is, while this is happening simultaneously in attendance to it, alongside of, at the same time, parallel. So these people are like this, and when they're like this is what they're doing at the same time. So they're feasting together without fear, no fear. Themselves shepherding, or shepherding themselves, feeding themselves, caring for themselves. So the picture is you have a church worship service, first century, and part of your service, at least early on, 1 Corinthians indicates this, that in some of the churches, and at Troas, they did the same thing. You have a service, and part of the service is you have a feast. You have a feast. There's an opportunity to share, to build fellowship, and usually springing from that, you might have the Lord's Supper. Okay, kind of end on that high note, kind of like a Passover meal, Lord's Supper. So what was happening, these folks are there, they've infiltrated the church, these are wolves, they're in your church. And they're dangerous. They're like there by the shoreline, the rocks, the reef that you don't see, and you're taking your boat and you don't see it. If you don't see it, you hit the rocks and you get crashed, you get shipwrecked. These people are out to shipwreck others. And you can tell if you're watching carefully, watch them. They're feeding themselves. They're cliquish. Okay, they're hanging out together, and it's all about their bellies. It's all about themselves. Okay, so very self-centered focus. So they're shepherding themselves, they're feeding themselves. And then you have another noun to describe them. So there's 5 words that we're going to come to that I'm going to take out of these 2 verses, and I'm going to form my homiletical outline. And my teaching outline is going to come off of these 5 colorful verbs. And in fact, that's going to lead into my title, the figurative description of these colorful apostates. Okay. So what we have here now is clouds. And the next word, waterless, without water, no water. You know, we live in a state where, oh man, it's so hot and we need moisture so badly. And here's a cloud, it's going to rain. And no rain. And the next one, boy, we're going to finally get some rain. We need it so badly, no rain. And then it teases you like when you came in tonight, just a little spit. What did that do? Probably not much. Okay. So they're like clouds without water, no water. And by winds carried about, by winds carried about. Next colorful word, trees. Trees, they're like trees. Next word, an adjective here, trees. How are they described? Belonging to late autumn. These are late autumn trees. So we are so excited right now. In our backyard, we have 7 apple trees. And because of the growing season in the zone that we live in April, we can get those frosts and freezes and snows. And when the apple trees are blossoming, if those freezes come in, if it drops 32 or below, it kills those flowery blossoms and you're done. You're not gonna have any apples, or very, very few. So we've been in this house 4 or 5 years. So of the 5 years, 3 of them, there's pretty much nothing. But the other 2 years that we escaped the spring, we couldn't wait to the autumn, to the fall. In fact, I went out and bought this incredibly cool gadget. It's a pole with looks like a what's the Indian game that you throw the ball with? Lacrosse. It looks like a lacrosse head on like a 20-foot aluminum pole. And you can extend that thing up into the tree and just pull those apples into the lacrosse basket. And my wife last year, if you're her real friend, you received an apple pie from her if you were her real friend. And she made so much applesauce, and she made so many apple, what was it, maple filling or whatever, and apple butter. Eric Penley's kid kept coming back asking for another bottle, another can, whatever. And man, that autumn tree, pull those apples off, that's really good. These are trees belonging to late autumn, but without fruit. Twice dead, uprooted. Well, that's a whole string of descriptions that this is a pretty useless tree, in fact, dead. And then we have waves raging, wild waves of sea or lake, foaming up, continually foaming up to make froth. And they're foaming up their shame. And I love the ocean, love the ocean. And if you're by the ocean, those waves bring in all kinds of things to the beach. And it's neat when those waves, they finish their last extension, you have a little bit of foam kind of bordering that last little effort. And there's just sometimes enough momentum in that wave, it'll bring shells, it'll bring soda cans and leave a trace of sometimes trash. And that's the picture that these folks are like these crazy waves that just leave garbage on the beach. And the garbage is their shame, plural, their shames, multiple ways in which they are shameful. Stars, asterisks, stars, planeti, stars wandering, roaming, to whom the darkness of darkness, they're synonyms, but the gloom of darkness, unto a long period of time, or without end, or eternal, is reserved, or has been reserved. Wow, perfect tense. I see something neat there. It means it's very permanent, this condition. So anyway, so I'm looking through the passage, picking out the words. I want to start working on some relationships. And so what I'm going to look at here, the thing that it grabs my attention just grammatically that's of interest to me, I'm seeing those 5 nouns, okay? Rocks under the water or a reef. And then it's described in a certain way. And then I go to clouds and they're described in a certain way. And then I come to number 3 to trees, and it's described in a certain way, late autumn trees. Number 4 is the waves, and number 5 is stars. So there's 5 graphic word pictures that Jude is using here to describe the character of the apostates. So it's just jumping out. And you can see those words, I always, when I parse or translate, I always circle the participles. That's just my own. That's not technically how you do your diagramming, but that's how I do it. I'm not changing. Okay. So I circle my participles and look at all those participles. Participles help define a noun or a verb. So, excuse me. They're giving additional explanation to a verb and a certain relationship to that verb. So these things are all jumping out to me. And now I'm going to draw my message from it. So let's get to the message for a few minutes here. So these are spots in your love feast. Let's begin there. So I'm going to say, number 1, these 5 characteristics of apostates, very graphically described here. Number 1, they're hidden rocks. They're hidden rocks. I looked up shipwrecks today. How many were shipwrecked because of rocks? Quite a few. Others had other issues. The one that really caught my attention was the one right above Niagara Falls. It was a metal ship. It broke off from a tugboat. 2 guys were in it. And how many of you been at Niagara Falls by that roaring water above the falls. Usually as you walk down and watch this beautiful river just roaring down, there'll be a sign by the river. And basically it says words to the effect that if you're in the water at this point, there is no return. You're going for a ride. And these poor folks, these sailors were upstream working with a tugboat, and their boat broke off in 1918 and started going down to go over the falls, but it got hung up on rocks. It was a pretty heavy boat. And it was there for over 100 years, until a horrific storm just a couple of years ago elevated the water to a point that finally it lifted up and dumped that thing. Okay. So these folks are hidden rocks, and they are daring rebels who are seeking to destroy, and they do it by infiltration. They're coming into this, what should be the sweetest part of a service, this communal meal, this fellowship meal, this love feast, which transitions into the Lord's Supper in many cases. And so there they are. I mean, they're in the very heart of the fellowship, but their motivation is to do damage, And the only way you can know is if you watch them carefully, they're shepherding themselves. They're selfish individuals. Now, we all are that by nature, but by the Spirit of God, we can be something different. They aren't something different. They don't have the Spirit of God. So we saw earlier they were immoral people, and here we see that there's a lot of attention given to feasting. They're feeding themselves. All right, so they're rocks while they feast with you without fear. I mean, they're very bold. They're in your face. They're right there in your service, and they're pigging out. Brazen self-indulgence and cliquish is implied. All right, number two, these apostates, when it comes to their character, they are waterless clouds. They're clouds without water, carried about by the winds. So I kind of illustrated this already, where we see what looks to be a promising cloud. Man, rain's finally coming. So when you see these apostates, at least initially, they appear on the scene with eloquent promises of refreshment and enrichment to those who follow them, but they produce nothing. They are good for nothing. A lot of talk, a lot of show. Clouds are a lot of show, and they make no eternal contributions for good. They talk big. They're out there in front of you. Can't miss them, but they leave nothing behind. They're boasters, big mouths, and they're carried about by the winds. And they're unsafe to follow. They're unstable. They lead others astray. Wow, clouds, waterless clouds. Okay, number three, they're dead trees. They're dead trees. The character of these apostates, they're dead trees. So it says late autumn trees without fruit. And you're going to see four attributives expanding upon this figure of a tree. Men are called trees. They're autumnal trees of the autumn. Think about at the end of the harvest season. That's kind of what the word's describing. At the very end of the harvest of autumn, what happens to trees? They're dry, their leaves drop off. So we're going to the very last part of the harvest season, and when you come to that, there's been nothing on the trees. Nothing. Right now, we've got apples. I wouldn't recommend eating them, they're green. But we're going to get into the fall, and man, I'm going to be grabbing apples. My dog will eat apples. Everyone's going to have apples. If you're a friend of Elisa, she'll make you pie. All you have to say is, I'd like to have one of those pies. How did you forget me last year? Because we had a banner crop last year. And I think we can do it this way. We did it before. We had a Wednesday prayer meeting where we had an apple pie prayer meeting in our house. So I think we just need to do that this autumn. We'll have an autumn apple pie at our house. Okay. 7354. Yeah, West 98th place. You need to come. All right. So the point is, not only was there no fruit and harvest, go to the extreme end of it. There's nothing there. Nothing there. They're trees without fruit. All you have is barren branches. And they're twice dead. doubly dead. Some have said that means they're dead through and through, which is certainly true. But what in the world could be meant by these apostates being twice dead? Help me out. How would you interpret that? How are these people twice dead? Physically and spiritually. That's a very good solution. Physically, they will die and are dying. And spiritually, they're dead in their sins, okay? So they're spiritually dead now, which will lead to their spiritual death, physical death, the second death. Okay, so some interesting ideas that you can tie into that twice death. So there's current spiritual death. This speaks to the fact of the coming second death, and they're pulled up by the roots. We've been working on a project in our front yard, and I dug up a plant and I turn it upside down so the sun will hit it and dry out the roots. It's dead. It is really dead. I'll shake the dirt off it and conserve a little dirt and throw it away. But these trees, no fruit, twice dead, easily uprooted, useless. I remember, I'm picking on Lisa a little bit here. We were at a Christian camp called the Wilds in North Carolina. And we were with our deacons. We were doing a hike to what is called, I don't forget, is it the Third Falls or Fourth Falls? Or is it the fourth one? They're beautiful waterfalls there in North Carolina. And this camp had a really monopoly on the hill there. Some beautiful falls. So we're going down the trail. You want to tell the folks so I don't tell it wrong? Am I doing okay? So it's pretty steep, if I recall, and we're all grabbing trees as we go down. You're holding vines and rocks, and it's steep, and you're kind of working your way down to this pool at the bottom of a beautiful waterfall. And I'm down maybe 20 feet. Shame on me. I should have been next to my wife helping her, and I wasn't. Go ahead, honey. Oh, really? So that makes the story even worse. Oh, ow. Okay. All right. So I'm 5 or 6 feet in front of her. And then all of a sudden I hear this snap, crackle, pop. And Elisa grabbed the tree. It was dead twice. I mean, dead. So she was leaning into that tree. And then I saw this flash go by me. I mean, like lightning. I've never seen my wife go any faster. I mean, full speed down this. I was like, whoa. And I couldn't grab her. I didn't help her. Correct me if I did. What did I do? It was slow motion, and we were all cheering. That's right. We were all saying, go, Elisa, you can do it. And she stayed on her feet straight down this thing until the very bottom. And then she did a really interesting landing there in the water. So, but I can still hear that dead tree, snap, crackle, pop, gone. There she goes down the hill. You know, wow. That tree was useless, actually damaging. And these apostates, wow, they're dead trees. They're good for nothing. Maybe firewood for a fire. Okay, number 4, they're wild waves. Wild, raging waves. And of course, it's portraying these people as restless and unrestrained and untamed in their appetites and passions. And they produce foam, the foam of shame that rolls into the beach of life, leaves a film and dirt and debris. Very sad. Litter. They litter the world by their sin. You know, the wicked are like these, like the troubled sea, for it cannot rest in its waters, cast up mire and debris on the beach. So they're wild waves, wild waves. And then finally, they're wandering stars, wandering stars. So the word stars, there's your main noun. And this is neat because he's using all these illustrations from nature. And now he's talking about looking up into the second heaven, into the stellar heaven. And you have all those stars up there fixed. You know, if you're a mariner, you can navigate by looking at those stars that are fixed there in the sky. But occasionally you see something move. And what would that be? Be satellites. Yeah. No, they'd be what? Meteors. So something goes across the sky. Where's that meteor go? You see it for a moment and then it goes where? Out of sight, into the dark. Maybe a comet. Or what they might have been watching was planets. So you have everything fixed in the background, and then you have something moving, wandering, disappearing, going into the dark of space. And now he uses that analogy, comparing him to these wandering stars, these shooting stars, these flashes of light that disappear into darkness. That's what a false teacher is, man. They're dark. They come across as angels of light, but you follow their beams, it leads into darkness. Wandering stars, to whom is reserved, to whom it has been reserved, the blackness of darkness forever. So really a pretty scary picture there. Reserve the blackness of darkness forever. So where they lead to and where they go themselves is a place of utter darkness. Of course, it describes separation from God and hell. So the sure fate of these apostates are described, the blackness of darkness, very intense picture there. And the tense that is used there denotes that their fate is firmly fixed and abiding. So those who reject God will live in utter darkness forever. So really powerful passage, 5 graphic pictures, word pictures. And Jude's really good at this. This is, I mean, you read this and say, wow, I'm engaged. I want to hear it. Man, it helps picture these people. So tremendous metaphoric use of words. Okay, any questions on these 2 verses before we go to pray? Maybe a better question would be, let's talk about the 5 words for just a moment and take applications. We did some reading, we did a little exegesis, we've done a little homiletical outline of just 5 of these things, a little exposition. So what would be the takeaways? What's the application from those 5 words? The hidden rocks, the wild waves, the wandering stars, the waterless clouds, the dead trees. How would you take those truths and turn it on its head and apply it to your life? What would it be? One is obvious. We look out for apostates because this is their character, and this is the damage, and this is their destiny, and all that. We can see that. Well, how else could you apply it? One interpretation, multiple applications. But what else? How else could you apply this? Don't be like any of them. Yes. That's as broad as you can say it. You know, here are these people, beware. But don't you be like any of those 5 descriptions. All right, let's go more specifically about that. How would you then apply it specifically? I don't want to be like this in this way. Oh. Say it again, Chuck. Yeah, the false religions are out there and they're just under the surface and they have pointed rocks and you're going to crash if you go and play. Okay, Mark?
Well, we need to mean what we say as believers. Sisters, so the outside world will see. You know, we're just like a big storm cloud. And nothing to back it up.
Yeah, a lot of show, a lot of noise, but don't do anything. Yeah, that's a great application. We don't want to be the waterless clouds where, man, there's no benefit to anything. We talk big, we look big, but nothing happens. No one benefits by our life. Great point. Great point. Elisa. Yeah. Yeah. So at least if you couldn't hear that, is that we can take the negative there, which is trees without life. We should be, if anything, trees that are life givers. And you have so many illustrations in the Bible about Christians being compared to trees, believers compared to trees. And that'd be a neat theme to develop. That'd be a great devotional just to say, wow, we are trees. What kind of tree should we be? Should we be like that palm tree? Should we be like this oak tree? Should we be by whatever? Yeah, excellent. You can hold on to them, baby. Yeah. We had a tree. Did you notice the tree outside broke, cracked in half? Those Bradford pears are usually weaker trees. And yeah, you want to be a tree people can climb on, hang on to, hold on to. Yeah, good. Karen.
Care for other people unselfishly.
Yeah, that's shepherding. Boy, you're waiting and say, boy, this guy's a great shepherd. No, they're selfish shepherds. It's all about feeding themselves. So being selfless is a great point there to be made. Yeah.
We have to be careful not to lead people astray when it's talking about the stars. Stars were used, as you said, as like navigation.
Yeah.
And, us being as Christians, we stand as followers of Christ. And if we don't take that, we take it lightly, then we can easily lead people astray from the true light.
Excellent. We should be fixed on Christ. We should have fixed positions. We shouldn't be wandering. We shouldn't be tossed to and fro of winds. With every wind of doctrine of man, sleight of hand. Yep, Rudy.
I experience interesting that there are thousands, maybe millions of people. False teachers. Yeah. And it shows.
Yeah. Breaks your heart. It breaks your heart. Yeah. And Jesus said there'll be many of these people, especially in the last days. Perilous times will come. There'll be many deceiving. Yeah. Elisa. Yeah. Yeah. So here's this ocean being described in that passage with the waves coming gently to the beach one after another. And our righteousnesses, our works, we should be repeatedly serving and doing that repeatedly. Whereas this is raging waves, blowing out foam and just throwing debris and throwing junk all over the beach, leaving the trace of ugliness. After a big storm, you go to the beaches, you'll see all kinds of junk thrown up there. And these folks leave a path behind them. Wherever they go, it's a trail. Chuck. Yes. Yeah, definitely. I know when Pastor Stedman and I and some of our group, the church, I think it was 3 years ago, we were climbing up a 14 or Tabaguash, I think it was Shavano. And we started early. And if you're leading it, you're always looking for those storms that can come out of nowhere. And that day, man, a storm came out of nowhere. So we had rain, probably sleet, maybe a little snow, winds. It just came out of nowhere. And we had too many in our group. It was, you don't risk it. So we said, we're going back down. And then it cleared up. It's gorgeous. But you're always watching for these storms. That's where you can get in trouble. And the Lord's giving us these passages. Look out for these people. These are roaring waves. Be careful. Okay. Yep. Brother Bud.
From a historic standpoint, the apostasy of our nation, as far as Christianity, came because churches minimized the danger of the rocks of liberal theology, evangelicalism, and they didn't see the dangers, and it led to their destruction. So vigilance on the part of the church and the leaders.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Excellent. The hidden rocks, and they're there. Yep. Rudy.
Some people are probably following these false teachers, looking for spiritual. Right.
Yeah.
So they're going to be responsible.
Okay. We have plenty of time to pray, thankfully, but let's just ask this question, see if we can answer it with this passage. Why are there so many people attracted to these rascals, these apostates? From those 5 words in their descriptions, what are they using as the drawing power for people to follow? Because why are there so many people following these people? What do they do that gets this crowd? It's telling us right there. Okay, their music. I think you're thinking very accurately. Yeah. Yeah, yes. They're attracting by a lot of noise, a lot of lightning and thunder would be the noise. Materialism, it promises of materialism, wealth and health. Something new. This is exciting. Raging waves are cool to watch. Okay. Clouds, don't you like clouds? Do you really know clouds?
Any religion that teaches you it's okay to feed yourself.
This is very flesh-centered. Feed yourself. What is Islam? When you boil down the practice of Islam, what's the attraction to the men? Sex and food. Let's just be honest. It's sex and food. Feed your flesh. Feed your flesh. Okay. Mormonism, feed your flesh. Same thing. Same father, same spiritual father behind Mormonism and Islam. Okay. So this is a very powerful passage here. Big storm, big show, Diane, big show. No fruit. Dead trees, twice dead. Wow, a lot of promises, empty. Yeah. So it's a really, really powerful passage. Really powerful passage. Okay, let's get a partner or two and spend some time praying. And let's pray, Lord, give us discernment to see the rocks under the water, to know where those reefs are. Let's look to the lighthouses that guide us to safe landing.